Well, that's enough of that. Right, so here it is, Notre Dame. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. When I heard it was on fire, I mean, RT were on it. They got so many pictures. So I watched it live, and all I could think of was that it was a satanic ritual and some sort of like symbolic satanic ritual, and there's a lot of other things going on as well at the same time. There's a lot of people dying, a lot of unexplained deaths, strange stuff happening all over the world, other cathedrals and churches burning, and an Indian temple has opened in Abu Dhabi. So I found it quite ironic that I get into cathedrals and they burn the Notre Dame down. So it's already raised billions of pounds to repair it, all sorts of people, huge outcry of misery and people crying and all sorts of like energy being generated from really upset Catholics. Lots of praying and stuff. But in all honesty, this thing has survived quite a few fires, and I personally think that fire is some purification ceremony and a way of strengthening the stone. I've looked at it before, and I also have a theory about this stuff. So that's not what I'm going to be looking at. I'm more interested in who built these things. I'm very interested in how these things came to be when they were built. And I've been reading Fulcanelli and all sorts of stuff and not getting very far. There's lots of description, and you have to read between the lines. Even if when you read Fulcanelli, the guys who write the forwards and the prefaces talk about the dilemma that authors like Fulcanelli are in, because we have the esoteric and we have the exoteric. The exoteric is what we know, what is revealed to us. Like, it's a big cathedral, we go there and we pray, and it's temple, it's a place where you can connect with God, and there's priests, and that's the exoteric. The esoteric is the real meaning of the place, what it actually does represent. So there's some quite good pictures on here. This is like they're saying how horrifying the imagery was, and how people were devastated and crying, and my heart goes out to everyone. People like, it's a horrible looking place. I really have got no sort of like love for Notre Dame Cathedral. It's, out of all the cathedrals, it's one that I'm not all that keen on in my list of cathedrals. I mean, Cologne Cathedral is ghastly, but I'm more interested in going to look at Cologne Cathedral than Notre Dame. I think it has something to do with when I was a very small little girl. I could only have been about 5 or 6 because we were living in Lancashire, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame was on television, the original version with Lon Chaney. And when he was like being stoned and bullied by the people of Paris in the square, I was so upset that I rushed out of the house and ran up, went to play with my friends. I was so devastated. So I've never had any sort of time for Notre Dame. I think it's because of this childhood experience. It absolutely breaks my heart to see such a magnificent cathedral like Notre Dame go through so much destruction. It's all right. It's just a roof and a bit of wood burnt, love. They've made enough money to build another cathedral. And this red smoke, that's wrong. And there's been a lot of people finding some very nasty stuff in this, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if it hadn't unleashed something, because the skies over London the following day were absolutely ghastly. The very nice clouds were here, but there was also something not very nice up there. Okay, so we'll kill that tab and that one. and I'm going to go here. Now, I became interested in France after doing a video a few weeks ago tracing the path of what I believe to be some sort of mud flow event down the hill and down here, and I realised that at the top of the hill here there's a French Quarter. Now I've got a feeling, and I don't even know where this feeling comes from, that where I live has something to do with artisans and France, and I don't know why, it's just a feeling I have. So I've been researching France and the cathedral builders in France, and I came across this bunch of people called the Cagots. Now the Cagots are normal human beings like thee and me, but they are hated and shunned by other local people. And I'll read this because this is sort of like I think this was written in the 1800s. The earliest date at which they are mentioned is 1288, and they were settling in areas of France, but they were consigned to a separate quarter in any town where they lived, called a Cagotery, and they dwelt in wretched huts. They entered the church from a side door where they lived, and when they died they were buried apart from others. Their descendants were regarded with contempt. They had a side door in the church, and there's still some churches in France where you can actually see they had separate basins outside. They weren't allowed to wear shoes when they walked in they weren't allowed to go barefoot. They were considered to be lepers, deformed, cretins, but when they were examined, they were pretty alright. They weren't a distinct race. They were like okay, but they were, it says that the word Cagot was supposed to mean dog of a Goth, but they were also known as other things, like Canaanites was another word for them. But they were a people of the Pyrenees affected with a kind of cretinism, but when they were actually sort of like looked at, they weren't. They were supposed to have goiter, cretinism, but they didn't. It says the goitrous and cretinous persons whom I have examined in the valleys of the Pyrenees are absolutely distinct from the Cagot. In short, Cagots and cretins are different. So these people have had it hard. Even the government tried to stop all this apartheid, really, isn't it? It's like, but there's also conflicting reports. Some people say that they're blue-eyed and light-haired, and other people say that they're short and swarthy. So I don't think there was any particular look to these people. They were just hated and despised. And he talks here about skull shapes, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it. Yeah, brachycephalic skulls or dollycephalic skulls. I think the dollycephalic skulls are pointy heads, yeah, and posterodocio, so some have pointy heads at the back and pointy heads at the front. So they were, some of them were a bit pointy headed. So they didn't know what this happened to them, why they were so maligned. They're quite peaceable, they're dark and handsome. Somebody said they were like gypsies, but they weren't lepers, so there was no real reason. They were only allowed to work as carpenters because there was a belief that carpentry wood doesn't collect bacteria and germs. So there was no real reason for this sort of outlawing of the Cagot. There's still a few, I think there's one or two people who claim to be descended from the Cagots, but they're a little bit sort of circumspect about it because they were just so hated. That's the Cagot. Now, another thing about the Cagot, they said that they had webbed feet, webbed hands, earlobes that didn't join to their heads, and they were also forced to wear like a badge with a red goose foot on, so that they could be very much like the Jews were expected to wear the Star of David, so that people knew who they were. They weren't allowed to intermarry. They were just treated like untouchables in India, the same as the untouchables in India. Now, I did a little bit of mooching about, and I found quite a few references to why they were hated so much, and more than once a reference came up that they were actually part of a Guild of Carpenters, and who were working on the cathedrals. So then I found this with this guy that I've sort of been looking at, Xavier Seguin, on the Eden Saga site. The Jacques, or the Cagots. Gifted builders or repulsive monsters. Initiated in a very ancient tradition, that of energy building, also called sacred building, these men of great learning possess the intricacies of geometry which they exercise through the art of the line. On several occasions I have discussed the art of sacred building. So he has, I mean, there's a lot of pages in this, he goes everywhere, but he talks about the builders of menhirs, cairns and dolmens, who had themselves inherited their talents from the sacred builders of Atlantis. The art of energies and polarities was transmitted by a strange parentage. Through secret clubs like the Wolf Clan, the art of energies came up to the builders of medieval cathedrals. Followers of the art of line and cut, craftsmen, carpenters, glaziers, carvers of stone or wood, they'd all received initiation from their ancient patron, Jacques the Miner, hence the nickname which they are tricked out, the Jacques, because they were the children of Master Jacques. So he belonged to the race that covered the west of Europe with megaliths and dolmens. He is a gander, a master gander. As a master, he was introduced to the nature of the stone, and the legend notes that he carved stone from the age of 15. I found more information about this. I'll go there in a minute. So, some legends say he was murdered at the Sambon by the Brotherhood of the Father of Soubise. That is, so Jacques is the generic name of this nation of builders and farmers, the people of the stone and the earth, pre-Celtic and travelling around the western Mediterranean world. So this learned knowledge is passed down. It's not something, it's secret, it's esoteric, it's theirs, and it's passed down from father to son, master to apprentice. And the Society of the Jacques consisted of 4 corporations: peasants and artisans, merchants and financials, warriors and princes, scholars and healers. Christian Middle Ages put them under the banner of Saint Jacques of Styx, Saint Jacques of Cups, Saint Jacques of Denier, and of course the Order of Knighthood, which ensured the protection of the early pilgrims, the Order of Saint Jacques of Sword. This is illustrated by the tarot. Stick, sword, denier and cup, spades, diamonds, clubs and heart. So these Jacques, the Cagot, they see he has a different take on things. He believes in globe earth, and he also believes that Atlantis and other civilizations were actually huge spaceships which literally were like floating lands which came into our sea, stayed there, and then when they went they caused floods because of the velocity, but I don't know about that. So they talk about, in the late 13th century, with the arrival on the scene of the Western Inquisition, the crusade against the Cathars, and in the early 14th century the end of the Order of the Temple and the return of emigrants from the Middle East Frankish kingdoms, the people of the Jacques went underground, and in the southwest they were called the bigots. Blonde with blue eyes or olive brown, the bigots were in the situation of the untouchables of India or the Jews in the ghetto. They lived in communities outside of cities and towns and of course marry together. They are masons, carpenters, surgeons and healers. Women are weavers and midwives. Sewn on the left shoulder they wore the bridle, the paire d'arc, the goose foot. So that's what they had to wear. Despite the stigma, they were still protected by the lords. So this would have been why the government tried to sort it out for them, but people didn't like them. They didn't like them. They were different because they probably were different. I think they practiced magic and alchemy. They got a worse reputation. There were lots of revolts. They were hated. So this is interesting. So here he talks about the story of Mother Goose, and he explains a little bit about the story, but then he goes to why the language of the geese, or the language of the goslings, was associated with these builders and the footprint of the goose, these artisans. So the footprint of the goose is that of a webbed foot. In this respect it is similar to the palm as a universal symbol of excellence. Even before the laurels honoured the winner, to win a palm already marked a form of control. In Greco-Roman antiquity the palm of the goose rewarded the winner. Not to mention in ancient Rome the famous geese that saved the capital from a barbarian invasion. In Thanksgiving the emperor had a temple built for these noble birds. Were they birds or were they just people? In the Middle Ages the goose used to designate a coded language that was only for insiders, the language of goslings. This language of goslings was also named patois. Similarly, the coded language of the builders of cathedrals was called art gothique or art goth and has become argot. In Old French the word oi meant here and was pronounced as yes north of the Loire. The language of goslings was the language of the children of Mother Goose. It was used to avoid being understood by undesirable first church people contractors, those who paid companions, those who knew nothing of sacred building and the effects on the followers. Much of Christian fervour dating from the 11th century is due to the energy efficiency of Romanesque churches and Gothic cathedrals. Gothic art was also there, not only the sacred knowledge but also the secret language that was used to protect the vulgar. We have seen how the same language of goslings served the Druids' healers to make themselves known to their flocks while protecting themselves from the rigours of the Inquisition. For builders of cathedrals, the pradoc or foot goose was a metre and a sign of recognition. The bridle later will be similar to the Saint Jacques shell, also called Maitre. Oh yeah, Saint Jacques was also supposed to have been the guy who built Solomon's temple, the pillar of Jacques, or maybe even the Boaz. So the Cagot, another name of Jacques or Jacquerie, had been told to have hands and webbed feet. This reputation is probably false, although the bridle was the hallmark of Cagot, red like the paw of the animal, sewn on clothing as a sign of infamy and banned from society. The goose is a sacred animal, a friend of Aphrodite, white like the Milky Way. So the goose, yeah. So the guilds were formed quite early on in societies to bring people together for economic reasons, community reasons, and the earliest traces of guilds was they were formed for religious and social purposes and were originally voluntary. So they had these frith guilds or peace guilds, and quite often, as in the case of London, the guild law became the law of the town. So the main objectives for the early guilds was the preservation of peace, right and liberty. and religious observances. They looked after the sick, the dead, and the merchant guilds were formed for the primary purpose of obtaining and maintaining the privilege of carrying on their trade. And then they guarded their monopoly jealousy. The organisation of the merchant guilds is known from the constitutions of guild rolls which have survived. So you can find out about how they worked, how they possessed extensive power, and they were tight as well. They kept their information private, secret. Knowledge was passed on from father to son, and they had a lot of power. Then they had the craft guilds. So the craftsmen, ever increasing in numbers, struggled to break down the trading monopoly of the merchant guilds, so they formed their own guilds. Weavers and fullers were the first crafts, and by 1130 they had guilds established everywhere, and they gradually broke down the power of the merchant guilds. There were guilds for everything, and the head of the guilds, which is probably the merchant guild at one point, would have been the Lord Mayor of London, apparently. And here we have some photographs of our guys here. Come back. Now, when I saw this photograph, I genuinely thought at first that this couple were for some sort of like 1970s upper class hippie convention. Top hats and loons, as we used to call them. But no, this photograph is from 1928, and these guys are members of a carpentry guild. Journeyman carpenters in Germany, and the picture was taken in 1928. Journeyman carpenters still wear almost identical outfits. Here they are, broad-brimmed hats or little top hats. Some other trades such as builders and metalworkers. So this is, I think this is where the top hats came from the Journeymen, from the original cathedral builders, the original masons. They wear slightly different clothes from each other so that they can tell what loons. It's a very the tradition of the journeyman carpenter is a very long, very interesting and very well respected one. In Germany, once a carpenter has completed their professional training, they must travel for 3 years and a day and are forbidden to work within 50 kilometres, so about 30 miles of their hometown. Others do not join a particular group but are free journeymen. Here they are today. They also wear an earring just in their left ear, a gold earring. They keep their hats on all the time. They wear mother of pearl on their clothes as well, which is interesting because you have the pearly kings and queens in London who cover their clothes with mother of pearl buttons. This is really interesting stuff. I bet my voice is really slow on this because I feel that my internet is playing up. They wear their hat all the time. This really doesn't want me to look at this, does it? I'm pressing it to go up and it's going down. I'm pressing it to go down and it's going up. So yeah, so I think our Cagots were this sort of thing. They were journeymen, they were masons, they were carvers, they were artisans, and they kept their trade and their knowledge very, very secret. They'd had it passed down from the beginning of time. In France, the Compagnons de Devoir are trade guilds. They are also very old, dating back to medieval times, but have traditions like the German ones. The French guilds teach around communal houses and are strictly governed by the rule. It seems sad that in Britain the tradition of the carpentry guilds has been lost. They were particularly important in medieval times, but not so much now. So they're livery companies now, the worshipful companies, and I've had a look at those as well. We'll have a look at those another time, but it's all the same thing. Secret knowledge kept in guilds and societies and passed down through generations or through the initiated. It's ancient. Okay, right, quick recap before I carry on. I'm researching who's building the cathedrals, and I found a lot of references to a French bunch of people called the Cagots, who were shunned and not allowed to intermarry and were considered to be cretinous, diseased, leprous, and just not the sort of people you want to mix with. However, the government liked them. The government tried to stop all of this, and they had to walk around with a picture of a goose on them. And then I come across references to an ancient guild that used the mark of the goose as a sign of a secret guild that they were all in, which had hidden knowledge regarding the building of cathedrals and the geometry and the polarities of the stones, which had been passed down to them through generations from father to son, sworn to secrecy, and they travelled everywhere, all over the place, as free masons, whereas other masons were tied to their homes and tied to their areas. And I did some more research on France, and it was true that very often in France, in the towns and the villages, people never went anywhere. They never ventured very far beyond their own boundaries, and these people probably just turned up and just wandered about and just turned up and just were different. So this is Milan Cathedral. And I was looking at this because I want to do a painting. My son got me a huge canvas for Mother's Day. It's absolutely enormous. It's about 4 foot by 4 foot. So what I want to do is like a huge like cathedral frontage, or part of a cathedral, like a spire or something, and then something in the background. So I was looking at this and thinking, God, this would take some painting, or would I ever do this? And I bought it up and I started to look at the woodwork, at the carvings, and I thought to myself, they look like wood. How couldn't anybody carve stone like this? You can carve wood like this. It's like the Indian temples. Is this stone, do you think? And if you look here, you can see the stone. This is stone, 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 stone. And then you've got like all this stuff just sort of stuck on everywhere. Stone, highly carved. Here, just. And then I saw this. It's a goose. And when you look, you can see it's carved. It's carved wood. Is that carved stone? So let's have a look at some gargoyles. Notre Dame was festooned with them. Has some particularly nasty ones. They'll still be there, most of them. It's not nice, is it? Look at the detail on this. Stone? Do you think so? Look at the detail on its chest, like feathers, and the tongue. This guy here, look, teeth. He's got teeth and nostrils and Look at the thin ear and the horn. Teeth again. So you can see here as well all the feathers on the chest. Can you imagine how much work it takes? Look at the dog. How much the slightest mistake with stone. Well, with wood too, but stone is less forgiving. So I'm a huge fan of Wise Up, and Wise Up has done a lot of looking into how wood can be turned to stone through being in water, certain types of water will eventually turn wood to stone. Electrolysis is another way. There are ways, there are methods, and they're all shrouded and hidden in mystery, and maybe it was one of the hidden talents of the Cagot and others that they could actually turn things to stone through an alchemical process, which meant that they carved stuff from wood and it was able to be alchemically changed to another material. And here we're in a shop, and look at the copulating birds. There's a monkey. All of this is going to be in that Gosling slang, I guess. You know, everything's going to have another meaning. Even the toppled over three-legged stool probably means something. The lady, is that my lady or a guy with long hair? All the tools of the trade. And you can see here that this guy here is carrying a goose. And they've got the other version of the clothes on, not the loons, the higher trousers, Journeyman. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to continue researching around the Cagot and other guilds, but yeah, much shunned now, or up until recently, and there are still a few of these people about. There was a lady about not so long ago who claimed to be descended from the Cagot and was rather proud of it, but they were really hated, and I think because they were probably protected by the state because of their status, I think they probably did have some strange rituals and odd behaviours and could do things and transform things. So I will rest my case here, and thank you for watching, and be back again soon with more.